Thanks again. Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to ask all the folks who are on Zoom, if you're feeling comfortable to have your photo, to show yourself in person, let's wave to one another. Those in the meeting house, please wave back. And let's say good morning to one another. And thank you. Thank you. So if you're here for the first time, or you come occasionally, or you show up Sunday after Sunday, if you've joined us by Zoom or are in the meeting house, you are so very welcome. And we are really glad that you are here now. I'm Reverend Abigail Stockman, the interim co-minister, and I serve with my colleague, Reverend Misty Dawn Shelley. If you have any questions or concerns, any questions about Unitarian Universalism, please don't hesitate to be in touch with one or both of us. If you're with us on Zoom, the order of service and the words to the hymns will be posted in the chat as the service goes along. If you wish to turn the chat function off, you can ask our Zoom host, who today is our office administrator, Pam Landry, and hopefully she can give you directions. I don't want to say she will, because this was a surprise to her, but hopefully she can give you directions to close the chat. We Unitarian Universalists are a non-creedal, religiously liberal faith tradition. We hold in our worship and in our faith formation that each individual and each community will explore a wide and varied set of beliefs and ideas that encourage us to live life as a spiritual journey, deepening our connections to compassion, justice, and an understanding of eternal truths. We seek the wisdom of the ages in all the places and corners it might be found, in the wisdom of the world's religions, in the varied art forms, in the quest for justice in peace, in the use of democracy as a spiritual practice, in the everyday and in the ordinary, and most of all, in being a community of spiritual journey seekers. Let us begin with our singing bowl chime as we center our bodies and minds into this hour. And I am hoping someone in the congregation will come forward and ring the chime for a moment as we begin worship. And will our chalice light? Thank you. Please come forward. And I will light the chalice in my space. If you have a chalice in your space for those on Zoom. Oh. Mine is not lighting this morning. Gathering here in the mystery of this hour begins one of our chanting hymns. Gathered here in one strong body goes the second line. Gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit, draw near. May the light of Spirit, which Webster's dictionary offers this definition, an animating or vital principle held to give life to physical organisms, or the activating or essential principle influencing a person. May the light of Spirit shine within our hearts and minds, illuminate our deepest yearnings as a living being for compassion, justice, and curiosity. The light of our spirits is illuminated. Come, let us worship together, aware of each other's spiritus, each other's breath. Please raise your spirits along with your voice and your body as you are able, and let us rise to sing our opening hymn and prayer together. Number 347 in the gray hymnal, Gather the Spirit. Excuse me. I'm going to sneeze on screen here. Thank you. So, our story this morning, our time for all ages, comes from a book I highly recommend called Kitchen Table Wisdom, if you are unfamiliar with it, by Rachel Naomi Remen. And this comes from a chapter in her book. And she tells a story, but it has two pieces around it, and I will begin with those. My patient, she writes, a physician who has cancer, comes to a session enormously pleased with himself. Knowing my love of stories, he has found a perfect story and tells me the following parable. Shiva and Shakti, the divine couple in Hinduism, are in their heavenly abode watching over the earth. They are touched by the challenges of human life, the complexity of human reactions, and the ever-present place of suffering in the human experience. As they watch, Shakti spies a miserably poor man walking down a road. His clothes are torn. His sandals are tied together with rope. Her heart is wrung with compassion. Touched by his goodness and his struggle, Shakti turns to her divine husband and begs him to give this man some gold. Shiva looks at the man for a moment and he says, "My dearest wife, I cannot do that."
Yeah, I'm gonna
Is astounded. Why? What do you mean, husband? You are the Lord of the universe. Why can't you do this simple thing? I cannot give this to him, he said, because he is not ready to receive it. Shiva and Shakti becomes a bit angry and she says, "Do you mean to say you can't drop a bag of gold in his path?" "Surely I can," Shiva said, "but that is quite another thing." "Well, please, husband," Shakti said. And so Shiva dropped a bag of gold into the man's path. The man, meanwhile, is walking along thinking to himself, I wonder, where am I going to find dinner tonight, or am I going to go hungry again? Turning a bend in the road, he sees something on the path in his way. Aha, he says, "Look, it's a large rock. How fortunate I am to have seen it. I might have torn these poor sandals of mine even further." And carefully stepping over the bag of gold, he goes on his way. And that is the end of the parable. And Rachel Naomi Remen continued to write, "It seems that life drops many bags of gold in our path. Rarely do they look like what they are. I asked my patient if life has ever dropped him a bag of gold that he has recognized and used to enrich his life." He smiles at her, and I want to say, "And cancer," he says simply, "I thought you'd guess." This was a powerful story, and that ends the reading. This is a powerful story about someone whose life really opened up around that diagnosis in his life. That is not true for everyone, and I want to make that clear. However, we all have bags of gold in our life. What are some of the bags of gold that have come into your life that were not recognizable for what they were at first? and literal bags of gold are rarely dropped in front of us. So we engage life in this 21st century, in this culture. We find ways to earn our livings. We fund much more than our basic needs, most of us. But bags of gold are sometimes exactly what's needed, or a little bit of gold. And this is the request for this week's offering. So those in the sanctuary, in the meeting house, may prepare for collecting the offering. To be able to question and then choose a faith community, to be able to choose to give some of our funds as we are responsibly able to support the operation and programs of the faith community of our choice, is it something many people do not have, and historically was not available to people of faiths that differed from whatever the reigning political force was. So this is a gift to be able to contribute to the financial running of your faith congregation. Your gifts, contributions, financial and otherwise, for the support and work of First Parish are received with great thanks and gratitude. The offering on this day, which the half plate will go to Habitat for Humanity, will now be collected and gratefully received. We hope it's also gratefully given. Let us enter together into a time of deep reflection, often called prayer. As we sit with these words and then a moment of silence, these words from John O'Donohue, adapted for light. For the light is definitely arising. Light cannot see things inside. That is what the dark is for. Minding the interior, nurturing the draw of growth through places where death in its own way turns into life. In the glare of neon times, let our eyes not be worn by surfaces that shine with hunger made attractive. That our thoughts may be true light, finding their way into words which have the weight of shadow to hold the layers of truth. That we never place our trust in minds claimed by empty light, where one-sided certainties are driven by false desires. When we look into the heart, may our eyes have the kindness and reverence of candlelight. That the searching of our minds be equal to the oblique crevices and corners where the mystery continues to dwell, glimmering in fugitive light. When we are confined inside the dark house of suffering, that moonlight might find a window. When we become false and lost, that the severe moonlight would cast our shadow clear. When we love, that dawn light would lighten our feet upon the waters. As we grow old, that twilight would illuminate treasure in the fields of memory. And when we come to search for the holy, for the spirit, let us first be robed in night, put on the mind of morning, to feel the rush of light spread slowly inside the color and stillness of a found world. Let us enter into the silence with those words. Amen. the sacred in questions, answers, doubt, and curiosity. Let's begin with my blurb, and that really is the term of art for those weekly summaries or enticements to Sunday's service. It began, "I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." The blurb noted that the phrase is often attributed on the internet to Richard Feynman and without citation. So it's not clear that he really wrote this. Richard Feynman lived from 1918 to 1988 and was a theoretical physicist, a 1965 Nobel Prize winner. He worked on something known as quantum electrodynamics, which Encyclopedia Britannica describes succinctly as the theory of the interaction between light and matter. And that's the end of our science lesson for this worship service. You've already been told a few times about the limitations of my own scientific knowledge and understanding. Quantum electrodynamics is not included in my understanding or knowledge. Have questions that can't be answered, then answers that can't be questioned. Whether that was really something Feynman, who was an admired character, irreverent to the social, cultural powers, but reverent to the simple forces of nature. He was a character in his brilliance. Whether he actually wrote that statement or spoke that statement is not the point of this sermon, but he is the one attributed with it. But the statement hits me as a pithy and certainly catchy one, expressive of the basic tension in the polarity built up between science and religion. A tension that still exists in some corners of religion and also in some corners of science. The polarity assumes that religion is about unwavering commitment to answers that can't be questioned, and science about unwavering commitment to keep asking questions until some theory presents itself as a possibility for answering those questions. I say that the tension is still alive in some corners, and one might assume it's not at all alive and not even an issue in Unitarian Universalism. And perhaps some 17 years after the incident I'm about to describe, it no longer is. But about 17 years ago, I was serving as an interim minister in another congregation, and I began to use the word God a lot. And one of the beloved and wonderful congregants who is a scientist, came up to me and said, "I am an atheist. You are talking about God an awful lot, and I am uncomfortable." And I said, "Oh," and he said, "I'm worried you believe in God." And I said, "What God is it that you're worried I believe in?" Well, that began a wonderful conversation, which ended up in a service the two of us presented a few months later. But it also was a wonderful opportunity to help me begin to find something about the word God, which is that when we use that word, we don't always mean the same thing. The answers that can't be questioned presumes a particular idea when it refers to religion of God as a supernatural being who is likely omniscient and omnipotent. And that is not the only definition of spirit, of God, of holy that abounds, and certainly not in Unitarian Universalism. And there is much about the ideas both of atheism and of theism that can be questioned. We welcome those questions. We embrace them. We encourage them. We reach out to find them wherever we can in this particular faith tradition. And that's really an important piece of who we are as spiritual journeyers and spiritual seekers. Just to be clear, for me, God is what happens in poetry and art, where our presumption of answers not even open to questions. Words in poetry are often turned around so that their meanings are opened up in ways we've never thought of before. Phrases are used that if we were to say them to one another in passing would make no sense. But in the context of a poem, they make sense. Art does the same thing. It turns things on their head. It takes what we see, what is turned around in our brain and through our retinas into one thing. But when Salvador Dali or Pablo Picasso turn it into their own form of art, we see it differently. It invites us to begin to think about the world around us in different ways. Light, the poem we used for our prayer, cannot see inside things, turns the idea of light a little bit upside down. After all, light is for seeing, isn't it? But light has its limits. That we never place our trust in minds claimed by empty light. What is empty light? Words we would not put together in the course of normal everyday living, but have meaning in the context of poetry. Something that shines but has no depth. We, Unitarian Universalists, in our principles and sources, are not a religion where this tension or polarity between questions and answers that cannot be questioned appears to be an issue. One of our sources, and I quote, humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reasons and the results of science and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit, is currently the fifth source cited as we draw upon, as one of the sources we draw upon to support and uphold our currently 7 principles and values. They may soon be 8. We may look at these sources a little differently. That time has come, but for the moment, they are still, that is our 5th source. when we say our welcome, we say we seek the wisdom of the ages in all the places and corners it might be found, including science, though that is not stated specifically. We are proud of being a faith community where one can question and question and question, and a faith community where we look to many resources for answers. And we recognize that theologically, as applied to religion, as applied to those questions about truth and meaning and wisdom in some larger philosophical way, we don't have answers, but that there are truths to be found in many places like poetry that turn what we know in our reason in a way that opens it wider so that our perspective widens, so that our understanding widens. But we live as human beings, and we do create idolatries, the mind and the spirit, no matter what our sources say and invite us to do. It is human, and we create in our lives answers that cannot be questioned. We are so certain of answers sometimes that when a bag of gold is dropped in front of us, we cannot see it for what it is, and instead we avoid the rock. So I'd like to invite you this morning to think about some of the ways in your own life there are answers that cannot be questioned. Places where poetry has not opened up the meaning of words to turn them on their heads just a bit, or art has not stretched the face or the clock or made cubes out of the shapes of being so that we might see them a little bit differently. As a congregation, you are in a time of shifting and changing, known as interim ministry. It is a time when it's easy to want to move to the answers that cannot be questioned. But it may also be a bag of gold for you to begin to turn those answers on their heads and look at them differently. In the coming months, you will have an opportunity to do some of that in small groups as you are invited to engage with some questions. And there will be more information coming about that to you soon from your transition team and your governing board. And I hope you all will consider joining in that process. For now, there are still answers in our lives that we often are unwilling to question. The atheist and I will refer to him that way, only he was much more than that. He was a lovely and brilliant gentleman, but quite stuck in the answer of atheism. In writing our sermon together, in taking the time to create that and have conversations about what we mean when we say we don't believe in God, and what we mean when we use the word God allowed both of us to turn our answers on their heads and begin to question them in new ways, expanding who each of us were in encountering the world, especially through the particular lens of atheism and God. May you, in these coming weeks, begin to notice where you might have answers in life that can't be questioned, and begin to consider what one small question about that answer might be if you were to have it. So may it be. Amen. Please raise your spirits, your bodies, if you are willing and able, your voices, and let us join together in the final hymn, number 207, in the gray hymnal. Earth was given as a garden. As we prepare to go forth into another week, we extinguish our chalice, but not our spirits. Gather your spirit, hold it with gentle firmness, nurture it if possible during the week, to grow in trust that exploring questions without clear answers will themselves nurture compassion, justice, and peace. Shalom, salam, ashe, peace be with you.